positive to negative again barely 7 hours later at 11:30 p.m. In light of all this, ponder the words of Merlin Williams, Director of the Federal Government's Weather Modification Office, in an interview published just yesterday, May 25, in the New York Times. A sense of urgency about improved storm warning was conveyed as he pointed to communities on the southern Florida coast as being particularly vulnerable. He said it is likely that, quote, "the kind of storms that killed only a few people in the past will kill thousands. The time is ripe for such a killer storm, and I'm afraid it could very well come this summer or fall." Unquote. These grids, my friends, are being used by our secret rulers to manipulate our weather for their own purposes. Last winter tremendous storms just happened to coincide with efforts of the gas lobby to deregulate natural gas prices, and now strange weather conditions have seriously delayed the planting of spring crops in our breadbasket areas and have caused crops to be washed away in others. What is going on now is weather warfare involving not only weather modification weapons of the Soviet Union, but also of our own secret rulers. The era of weather strategy has dawned, with America as the battleground. These secret coastal grids tend to produce regional and nationwide weather modification effects, while the Russian cosmospheres produce more concentrated localized effects. But now, with even more cosmospheres overhead than the 216 I reported to you last month, a battle royal is shaping up for control of America's weather. I cannot say who will win, but what I can say for sure is that strange weather will be widespread this summer and perhaps even more so next winter, and the losers will be you and me, the American people. This disruption of our food supply by weather modification has already begun, reflected in skyrocketing vegetable prices at your local supermarket. But a much more dramatic disruption in those food supplies that come from our West Coast could occur at any moment. I am referring to the effects of man-made earthquake and tidal wave disaster I first warned about a year ago in AUDIO LETTER No. 24. In that tape I gave the locations of 7 Russian fission super bombs that had been planted in deep undersea trenches around the Philippines. As I explained then, the Philippines sit like a keystone in the long arc of geological faults that ring the Pacific, the so-called Ring of Fire. A major earthquake erupting in the Philippines could work its way around the Pacific Rim and ultimately devastate America's West Coast, and that's exactly what is planned. Since I made that tape, I've also reported the planting of lower-yield undersea weapons around the Pacific and elsewhere by the Soviet Union. Many of these have been detonated, and during the past year strong earthquakes have been very frequent along the Pacific Rim, everywhere except the Philippines. What the Soviet Union has been doing, my friends, is to release tensions in the Earth's crust everywhere except around the Philippines, where the stresses are building to tremendous levels. When the time is ripe, according to Russian stress monitoring instruments in that area, the bombs around the Philippines will be set off. Soviet scientists anticipate that earthquakes and tidal waves of unprecedented proportions will be triggered as a result, and that as one result America's West Coast will be laid waste. For further details of the plan, I suggest you listen again to AUDIO LETTER 24. A few days ago a volcano in the Philippines began erupting, indicating that the stresses in that area are building up, and in the past few days the Russians have triggered strong earthquakes in the 6.5 Richter range in quick succession near Taiwan, Japan, and the Aleutians. My friends, the first major disaster in the secret geophysical war now underway lies just around the corner. Topic number 3. My friends, It's now been 5 years since my nonfiction book, The Conspiracy Against the Dollar, was published. The book led to appearances on countless talk shows all over America, followed by cassette tapes, and beginning 3 years ago next month, my audio letter monthly cassette series. All of this has come as an unexpected interruption in my own professional career as a financial and legal consultant with clients worldwide, and I think it's time to take stock to evaluate what, if anything, has been accomplished, and to tell you what I have learned from these 5 years of effort. But before I do that, let me say that for nearly 5 years, from 1968 to 1973, I had been helping in the development of private international business in the Republic of Zaire in Africa, and had many projects in the works there. For me, Zaire will always be a very special place, for it was there in the bush of Africa that I came to know, to love, and to walk with our Lord Jesus Christ in a way that I cannot describe. It has to be experienced. And from this experience, a spiritual experience if I may say, I was forced to take time out. Over the years I had been learning more and more about the real causes behind the political, economic, social, and military developments of our time. My contacts at high levels of business and government had involved many dealings also with the international intelligence community, which today serves big international business as much or more than it does government or you and me. Putting it all together, I had learned that a handful of incredibly powerful men were bent on wrecking your future for their own private gain. And so I wrote the book, The Conspiracy Against the Dollar. I felt you had a right to know. And it's now 5 years since I last saw Zaire. I'm still looking forward to the day when I'll be able to return once again. But today Zaire is under attack by the very forces I've been trying to expose and combat here in America. Zaire, like the United States and ultimately the entire world, is caught in the middle, ensnared in the power struggle between the rising empire of Soviet Russia and the crumbling empire of the Rockefeller cartel. The Conspiracy Against the Dollar became a bestseller, and I found myself on local radio talk shows all around the United States as well as in Canada. Many of the facts, dates, names, events, and plans I revealed in that book were common knowledge in the corridors of real power in America and abroad. But to most members of the public at large, these things were completely new. There appeared to be a thirst for this new knowledge about the true reasons behind the strange, tortured behavior of our world today. Gradually I began to acquire more and more new sources of information in business, in government, and in intelligence, both here and abroad. There have been many whose alleged tips I have had to discard, since cross-checking has proven them to be inaccurate or even in some cases deliberately fraudulent. But there have been many others whose information has proven reliable, and who have increasingly made me their exclusive channel to you. Time and again I've been told of specific instances, which I have checked and found to be true, in which certain of my sources have given crucial information to certain well-known commentators and organizations only to be betrayed in various ways. So in one sense it's a great honor, privilege, and heavy responsibility for the Dr. Beter audio letter to serve increasingly as a source of exclusive information to you. But in a broader sense, it's a sad indictment of the many other public information channels who are now denied access to this crucial information. Is the so-called almighty dollar, which is collapsing, really what's important? Will no one who claims to serve the public really do it? In short, is there no honor left in America? As I'll explain in a few moments, my friends, these are not just rhetorical questions. They go to the very heart of our desperate condition today. Beginning nearly 2 years ago in the summer of 1976, exclusive information in my audio letter cassettes began mushrooming. The reason for this was the role played by the audio letter in the Soviet underwater missile crisis of 1976, a crisis which still has never been made public by the United States government nor by any major media commentator. Those of you who are long-time listeners to my audio letter broadcasts already know the story of the Soviet underwater missile crisis all too well. You were living through it while most of your neighbors slept on, unaware or not caring that we were teetering on the edge of nuclear war. But for my newer listeners especially, I believe a brief review is in order. This crisis with its aftermath was a major turning point for the audio letter and for the United States. On July 19, 1976, I recorded audio letter number 14. For months I had been relaying to my listeners the growing fears of key trustees of the Rockefeller-controlled major foundations that a double-cross of America's secret rulers by its allies the Soviet Russia was imminent. Those fears were not shared then by our secret rulers, but as I revealed in AUDIO LETTER 14, the Russian double-cross was already underway. Soviet Russia was at that time preparing for a surprise nuclear attack. Like the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Russian attack plan in the summer of 1976 was based on naval strategy. The purpose of the surprise attack that was in preparation was to be the utter destruction of the United States Navy, aside from vessels at sea at the time of the attack. And the key weapons in the impending Russian surprise attack were to be not ICBMs or bombers, but short-range missiles with multiple nuclear warheads planted in underwater launch sites in our own territorial waters. They were being planted so close to their targets as to provide zero warning time when launched. If an attack like this were carried out, my friends, there would be no doubt about the outcome of the ensuing war, especially in view of the overwhelming Russian advantage in civil defense. The United States would ultimately lose. And so in July 1976 I made public information I had received from my intelligence sources about the underwater missiles which were then being planted by the Soviet Navy. Only 2 weeks later, on August 2, 1976, I followed up with the AUDIO LETTER number 15. In that broadcast I explained the naval strategy that was involved and gave the navigational coordinates of 64 Soviet underwater missiles, which by then had been planted worldwide. This was necessary because this crucial information was being blocked from reaching the Joint Chiefs of Staff by agents within our own government, and only by making it a public issue was there any hope that action would be taken. By mid-August, Canada and Great Britain became the first nations to take action to have the missiles around them removed, and by late August 1976 the United States Navy was fast at work too, pulling up Soviet missiles in our own waters. General George S. Brown, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had succeeded in urging then-President Gerald Ford to overrule Henry Kissinger and give the order for the missiles to be removed. The removal operation was completed on August 31, 1976. The very next day a letter was sent out over General Brown's signature to me and to thousands nationwide who had pressed the Pentagon for action. The letter said, in the present tense, that in effect no Russian missiles were in our waters. Many people wrongly concluded from this that there had been nothing to my charges about underwater Soviet missiles